Yo, what is up everybody, it's Joe the Gray here and welcome back to another Naruto reaction video here today. And today we have a very intriguing topic by NCHAMMER23, and as you can tell by the title, this is, was Madara right? So folks, to me personally, this really is one of the most intriguing topics to discuss in all of Naruto, and in fact in all of anime. Because I think it's safe to say the majority of the Naruto fandom believes that Madara Uchiha was a morally gray character, right? There's definitely a spectrum when it comes to determining the morality of Madara Uchiha. There are some people that believe his actions were pernicious and his character malevolent, while on the other side of the spectrum we have people that believe his actions were morally righteous and that he himself was a righteous character. Right? His actions and his overall persona do bring up a moral dilemma where, like I said, there is a spectrum. Right, some people are on the left, some people are on the right when it comes to it. So I'm definitely intrigued to see what NC Hammer has to say about Madara Uchiha's actions and what he thinks of Madara and whether or not he thinks he was right, quote unquote. So let's see what he has to say. But before we begin, any less greatly appreciate, hit that like button, turn on bell notifications to stay updated with yours truly. And if you're new and you enjoy, man, you mess with the kid, make sure to hit that sub button, because once you do, you become part of the family forever. Let's not waste any more time, screen. So what do you have to say today?
There's a lot of very polarizing questions in anime as a whole that people tend to take sides on. Recent ones that come to mind are things like, is Eren correct in his launching of the Rumbling?
That's a good one. That's a good moral dilemma to
correct
discuss.
in his siding with the elves in Black Clover? However, the question that we're going to talk about today was brought up years ago. Unfortunately, long before I had a YouTube page talking about anime. But just because it was brought up a long time ago doesn't mean that there isn't still people on two sides of the answer. And doesn't mean that the answer isn't important to explain.
Before we continue on, let me know your thoughts on Eren Yeager. What do you think of him as a character morally? Was he morally righteous? Or would you consider his actions to be deemed as immoral? Let me know in the comment section below. He's a very complex character who I would also say is morally gray. Let's continue.
Explore, because the question we're talking about today is arguably one of the most important questions ever posed by anime, and it's actually been a question posed by literature for generations. The question we're answering today is, was Madara correct? Or more specifically, was Madara's want to enact Infinite Tsukiyomi the right thing to do? For as long as Madara and the Infinite Tsukiyomi plan have existed, the Naruto fandom has been split into two camps on whether it was the correct thing to do or not.
Right.
But what's interesting is that the core fundament of this question has been prosed in literature for as long as literature has existed, which is why the fact that there's such a heated conversation around whether Infinite Tsukiyomi was the correct thing to do shouldn't be surprising. You know what else shouldn't be surprising? Me fitting a plug in right about here. So before we get to talking about morality and choices, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And every day you make choices, and if you guys are making the choice to not follow my other two YouTube pages, guys, well, it's the wrong one. I have two other YouTube pages, NCGamer23, where instead of talking anime, I play video games, and Hammer's Collection, where instead of talking anime, I build things from them. So Madara, one of the most interesting, well-spoken, and polarizing characters in the entirety of Naruto. And this is to be expected. The majority of the show was building up to him as a villain,
correct,
which is why how he died seems so disrespectful to the community. You see, for hundreds, and I mean literally hundreds of episodes, every event of Naruto built up to Madara coming back and fighting. But we never necessarily knew why Madara wanted to fight. Like, was he just coming back to wipe out the ninja world? Did he want to live longer? Did he not like the state of the ninja world as is? And it wasn't until pretty deep into the war arc, actually, that we finally got Madara's motivations for coming back and starting the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. Obviously, the reason that Madara started the Fourth Great Shinobi World War is because he was being tampered with by Black Zetsu, who essentially made him start the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. But that's not what I want to talk about. I'm going to leave Kaguya and the Otsutsukis out of this. We're talking specifically about Madara and his plan, because once you take in the fact that he's being manipulated by Black Zetsu, it changes the end goal and also takes his will out of it. So for the sake of this video, we're going to look at Madara as a singular entity. In order to talk about Madara's motivations, though, we have to talk about Madara's life, because his motivations are largely driven by his lifetime events. And the answer to whether or not he's correct in his goal of Infinite Tsukiyomi actually lies in his history. You see, Madara, just like Hashirama, was born during the Warring States period, a time before the formation of the ninja villages. And in the Land of Fire, there was many clans, not just the Senju and the Uchiha, the Sarutobi, the Nara, the Akamichi, all there. Same with the Uzumaki. But the reason it was called the Warring States period is because anytime a smaller clan, aka not the Senju or the Uchiha, wanted to launch an offensive on another clan, they would hire either the Senju or the Uchiha to help them launch that offensive. Because at the time, the Senju and the Uchiha were the two strongest clans. So let's say you're a small clan trying to invade another small clan's village. You would hire the Senju to help you so you would win your fight, because both the Senju and the Uchiha were mercenaries. However, if the other small clan heard that you were about to invade with the Senjus, they would hire the Uchiha. And since the Senju and the Uchiha were evenly matched, this would result in multiple battles over thousands of years, with neither truly stepping up as the superior. This happens for about 2,000 years, and then Hashirama and Madara are born. We know that they're reincarnations of Indra and Ashura, but once again, I'm leaving the Otsutsukis out of this. Madara is the son of the current leader of the Uchihas, and Hashirama is the son of the current leader of the Senju. Because the Warring States period has so much war, children have to get into battle very young. We're talking 6, 7 years old, they're pushed out onto the battlefield. And because of this, you grow up pretty quickly, especially when your siblings die. You see, Hashirama actually had 3 brothers, and two of them were killed during the Warring States period. Madara, on the other hand, only had 1 brother, Izuna. You see, him and Izuna were borderline inseparable and also exactly the same in terms of power. But Madara had another brother, and that was Hashirama, somebody he met multiple times outside of the context of battle. And over time, him and Hashirama became friends. But when news of their friendship got back to their respective clan leading fathers, both of their respective fathers used this as an opportunity to kill the next heads of their opposition family. And just like that, Hashirama and Madara began to realize that friendship between two warring families simply couldn't happen. This was furthermore reinforced when Hashirama lost some of his brothers. However, Hashirama still had Tobirama, who was actually the most ardent and outspoken person when it came to forgiving the Uchihas in order to stop war. However, Tobirama was also a very good fighter, and Tobirama was often paired up against Izuna. And one day, Tobirama killed Izuna after he created Flying Raijin. The reason Tobirama had to create Flying Raijin in order to beat Izuna, however, though, is relatively interesting. You see, Madara and Izuna knew how they had to awaken their MSs. They heard they had to kill somebody close to them. So both Madara and Izuna snuck into a boy's tent, a friend of theirs, and murdered him together. This boy, mind you, was an Uchiha. And after they murdered him, they both awoke their MSs. So because of this, Tobirama was relatively outmatched in his battles against Izuna for a while, which is why he had to create new jutsu to match him up against him. But the loss of Izuna hit Madara much harder than any of Hashirama's lost brothers hit Hashirama. You could equate this to the fact that Hashirama still had living brothers, or the fact that Madara was Indra's reincarnation and therefore hate was kind of in his blood. Regardless, now Madara, the current head of the Uchihas at the time, has lost the person he's closest to on Earth, Izuna, his brother, and at a very, very young age, mind you. See, this is a sentiment shared by both sides, that as the world currently is, people are fighting in wars much too young. This is felt more ardently on Tobirama and Hashirama's side, specifically from Tobirama, but still very much so from Madara. However, with Izuna's death, the Uchiha were significantly weaker, and therefore the Senju reached out to them and asked for peace. However, Madara did not want to take up this peace offer. Instead, he took Izuna's eyes and melded them with his own and awoke EMS, and used this newfound strength in order to challenge the Senju one last time. However, since both Tobirama and Hashirama were free to fight him now, he loses. Focus on that. He loses. You'll see, surprisingly, this is a trend in Madara's life. However, after he's defeated by both Hashirama and Tobirama, he tells Hashirama the only way they'll ever achieve peace is that Hashirama kills himself, and Hashirama accepts, stepping forward to kill himself so Madara can become the Hokage of their newfound village. However, Madara, seeing that Hashirama is real about killing himself, he stops him, no longer wanting more bloodshed between the Senju and the Uchiha. And it's at this point, and only this point, that the Senju and the Uchiha come together to make Konoha. However, as for who's going to lead Konoha, a problem arises. You see, Hashirama wants Madara to be the Hokage. Hashirama believes that Madara is more well-suited for it. However, Tobirama, being the genius that he was, told Hashirama and Madara they should put it up to a democratic vote of all of the clans involved in Konoha. And once again, Madara loses. And just like that, Hashirama takes over as the first Hokage, with his brother Tobirama serving as his advisor, personal bodyguard, and shadow Hokage. See, this is a common misconception. It wasn't Madara who was acting as Hashirama's shadow Hokage. In fact, a lot of the things that Madara would do while still being loyal to Konoha were not condoned by Hashirama. But just about as fast as Hashirama was elected Hokage, Madara started to get upset, because Madara believed that within Konoha, the Uchihas would be suppressed. This is actually why Hashirama wanted Madara to be the Hokage, in order to assign assuage these fears and show the Uchiha that they were just as welcome into Konoha as the Senju. So Madara started to talk to the Uchihas and tell them how they're gonna be suppressed by the Senju ruling class. However, the Uchihas had just got out of the warring state period. They had fought for quite literally 2,000 years and lost just as many brothers and sisters as Madara. And currently they were living in relative harmony with the Senju and the Yamanaka, the Sarutobi, and the Nara. Things were good. The village was actually...
Alright, so I want to recapitulate what NC Hammer has said so far and extrapolate and expand on that. So Madara Uchiha, I would describe, was a ticking time bomb, right? He, as time went on, with him witnessing war and attrition and this cycle of love and hate, he would develop a self-destructing god complex, right? With the major catalyst being the death of his brother by the hands of his best friend's brother, Tobirama, right? So the events that would follow would only further exacerbate his near fundamentalist beliefs in what would change the world and end the cycle of love and hate. Because here's one thing that Hashirama and Madara did agree on. They wanted to destroy the over millennia cycle of war and peace, right? This cycle specifically between the Senju and the Uchiha, who were the epitome of shinobi in the shinobi world. However, the means of doing so would be different between Madara and Hashirama, which is why as time went on, Madara would become more and more rebellious towards Konoha, to the point where he basically becomes exiled and becomes an outcast because he's unwilling to do things the way Hashirama wants to do it. Hashirama's vision was a vision of harmony, a vision of letting the natural order of things slowly bring down the war and attrition that has been around for over a millennia. However, Madara, who I would consider more of a realist, thought to himself, there will be war again. It might be delayed because of the harmony, because me and Hashirama are here to protect everybody and stop war, but it will happen again. So his means were more extreme, more radical, and they were not accepted by even Hashirama himself. So Madara reluctantly went along with the whole Konoha village thing and having all the clans come together as one in harmony. But him being a realist and him having a god complex, especially after getting new power from taking his brother's eyes and getting EMS, he wanted to do things his own way. And his seeming arrogance would lead to the events that obviously we all know of now, with him fighting Hashirama, things of that nature. So there was a clash of ideology between Madara and Hashirama in Konoha. And Madara, having strong conviction, wasn't going to back down. He was reluctant, but slowly his conviction would overwhelm and overtake his desire to try and cooperate with Hashirama in Konoha. Alright, so let's continue though.
Thriving in its foundation. Madara was a bit like that one friend who can't seem to have fun anywhere. Even if you're in the middle of Disneyland and there's no lines and you're getting onto every single ride in 10 minutes, they're still complaining about something. And that's who Madara was. See, say what you will about the future of Konoha. I know I have a take on it, and how the Senjus actually quite literally did become a ruling class and still are, and how Hokageship is largely passed down through nepotism. But at this current time, Madara didn't know the future. He was just complaining about Hashirama. And therefore, even if his fears were warranted with how the future of Konoha played out, at the current time, there was nothing to worry about. Oh, by the way, I lied earlier. Madara was the oldest of 5. He lost 3 of his other siblings when they were very young. But the thing that truly worried Madara was how he and Hashirama's view of the future of Konoha differed. You see, other ninja villages popped up because of Konoha's foundation. Essentially, other countries saw 2 of the strongest clans on Earth come together and make a village, and they thought, well, we should probably make those 2 out of defense. Hashirama wanted to cooperate openly with those other villages. However, Madara saw the strength of Konoha and wanted to use said strength to suppress the other villages. However, since Hashirama was in charge, the approach that Konoha was taking to the other villages was peaceful cooperation. And this didn't necessarily sit well with Madara. So much so, he actually went to the Hidden Stone village and beat the piss out of Mu and Inoki, and essentially told them,
"You will be subservient to Konoha. We are much stronger than you."
However, Madara's fears were truly brought forward to him when he discovered the stone tablet. You see, we know the stone tablet was altered by Black Zetsu to make this happen. But from Madara's point of view, he came across a stone tablet that talked about how the Uchiha and the Senju have tried to find peace multiple multiple times throughout the Warring States period, and every single time it's failed. So Madara decided that Konoha was a failed experiment and tried to convince both the Uchiha and Hashirama of this. However, once again, because Konoha was thriving and happy, nobody believed him. And this actually made the Uchiha kind of get rid of Madara. He was no longer the Uchiha clan leader. Once again, he's lost. But this time, it's an emotional battle. Essentially, the Uchiha told Madara that they have more faith in Hashirama and Konoha than they do him. And because of this loss, finally Madara has had enough and he leaves Konoha. And he attacks Konoha multiple times, mind you. Not just the one time he pulls up with Kurama. There was many attempts prior to that. And in every single one of those attempts, loses. Well, it's not that he loses, he's stalemated. See, ever since Madara awoke his Sharingan, once he decided that him and Hashirama couldn't be friends, he has been trying to kill Hashirama in every battle they've ever had. However, Hashirama's never wanted to kill Madara. In fact, he would rather kill himself than Madara. And so, every single fight where they've tied, that is exactly what Hashirama wanted. So every tie and or stalemate they've ever had, also a loss for Madara. But then obviously there's the big attack on Konoha that Madara launches with Kurama. They both fight themselves to the brink of exhaustion, which is insane to say because they both have limitless chakra, and their battle is so intense it makes the final valley of the end. I'm sorry. And it's at this point, after Tobirama quite literally begs Hashirama, Hashirama kills Madara. And once again, Madara loses. Madara knew he was going to lose. This is an incredibly important character plot point. You see, Madara knew he was going to lose against Hashirama, so much so that he quite literally programmed his right eye to use Izanami after his death to bring him back to life. And once Hashirama has buried and left his corpse, Madara comes back to life. And once Madara has been revived, he goes and hides with a mouthful of Hashirama's cells that he then takes out of his mouth and puts in his wounds. And literal decades later, these cells assimilate into his body and awake the Rinnegan in him, which restores vision in his right eye, which he lost by using Izanagi. And also, awakening the Rinnegan allows him to summon the demonic statue of the Outer Path, also known as the Ghetto statue, also known as the Husk of the Ten-Tail. Using this in combination with Hashirama's cells, he believes he's able to create an army of white Setsu. And as years go by, Madara formulates the Eye of the Moon plan, also known as the Infinite Tsukiyomi plan. Essentially, Madara thinks he has found the perfect plan for peace. However, Madara is dying and knows he can't accomplish this plan in his lifetime, so he needs to find a disciple. And he kind of found two people, Nagato and Obito. Madara essentially took his Rinnegan out and transplanted them into Nagato's face without him ever really knowing because he was so young, with the intention that one day Nagato would use this Rinnegan to bring Madara back to life. However, if he wanted Nagato to do that, he would need somebody to steward Nagato in that direction, and that person was Obito. And now we have Madara finally building towards his plan. The way that Madara builds towards his plan shows us a lot about his true motivation. You see, already with the Eye of the Moon plan formulated, Madara has taken out his own eyes and transplanted them into a child without their consent. He has also abducted a fatally wounded Obito and put a curse seal on his heart after healing him using Hashirama's cells that will essentially destroy his heart should Obito ever go against Madara. Think about this long and hard for a second. The reason that Madara and Hashirama came together in order to form Konoha was to make sure that no kids would ever fight in battle again. Nagato had the Rinnegan transplanted into him so young that he couldn't remember how he got them. And Obito was 13 when Madara abducted him. Now, mind you, of course, Obito was already a Genin in doing missions for the Third Great Shinobi World War. We're not talking about Konoha, we're talking about Madara. But in order to make sure that Obito was on Madara's side, he would have to do something that would make Obito hate Konoha. So he had the Hidden Mist Village kidnap Rin. But not only just kidnap her, transplant Isobu in her and then try to Trojan horse her back to Konoha. He then orchestrated Obito seeing Kakashi murder Rin so that she wouldn't go back to Konoha and destroy it with
set up that
Isobu.
scene
More
just for him to
children
see
being
that.
used in order to fulfill Madara's goal, when the loss of Izuna was the reason that he wanted to enact the Eye of the Moon plan anyways. And after seeing that, Obito became his faithful disciple. Moving forward with the Eye of the Moon plan in Madara's passing. With that little tidbit of history done, we can now talk about Madara's motivations. Obviously, we've already touched on the fact that Madara wanted to enact the Eye of the Moon plan in order to stop the cycle of hate and war within ninja culture. Essentially boiled down to its most basic tenements, he wants peace. I'm gonna give my 2 cents in my opinion on Madara's plan and how it pertains to just general ideologies, and then I'm going to play devil's advocate. So essentially, Madara wants peace, correct? However, Madara's entire life has been mired with anything but peaceful actions. During the Warring States period, Madara had multiple opportunities, some which while Izuna was still alive, to reach out for the olive branch that Hashirama was reaching to him. Because mind you, Hashirama was purposely stalemating every single battle between him and Madara because he couldn't see Shinobi himself killing a friend. Tobirama also, and you would already know this little tidbit if you've seen my You Know Nothing video about Tobirama, was trying to push for peace even harder than Hashirama. So from the side of the Senjus, there was an entire generation of shinobi trying to end the Warring States period, even after Tobirama and Hashirama had lost 2 of their brothers. But even if you chalk up these choices to not choose peace as non-consequential because Madara was probably not the leader of the Uchiha yet and very young, there's also other opportunities, like after the death of Izuna. See, after Izuna's death, Hashirama and Tobirama and even the Uchihas themselves wanted peace with the Senju. In fact, the Uchihas wanted peace with the Senju so badly that a lot of them defected to the Senju after Izuna's death, showing Madara not only that he was on the losing side, but also that peace was findable between the Uchiha and the Senju. Because it's not like the Senju were exterminating these Uchihas who were defecting, they were letting them in as a precursor and a pretense to Konoha's
foundation. But once again, Madara chose war over peace. And you could say, well, yeah, he just lost his 4th sibling. You'd be angry too. And that's fair, I guess.
When you ignore the fact that both Tobirama and Hashirama had lost siblings as well. And I'm sure all of the Uchiha defectors had probably also lost siblings. But even in the face of defeat, when Hashirama offered his hand up to Madara to find peace, Madara asked for Hashirama to kill himself. And only when Hashirama accepted it did Madara recant. Once again, until the very moment rejecting the concept of peace. And from the very day Konoha was established, Madara was a dissenter of Konoha's foundation, essentially saying that it was going to end in the Uchihas under the boot heel of the Senju, once again flying in the face of a peaceful notion. And then there's the difference in how Madara and Hashirama looked at relations with other villages. You see, what Hashirama wanted was peace. What Madara wanted was control. See, Madara knew with the strength of Konoha's combined union of the Uchiha and the Senju that they could put the other villages under the boot heel.
Okay, I think NCHAMMER is misconstruing Madara's ideology. Strawmanning it, I guess you could say, in a way, even though it's not technically an argument. The ideology is being misconstrued by NCHAMMER. Madara wanted peace, but he wanted peace through the removal of free will. That's what he wanted. He didn't want to control out of malevolence or because he has an invidious nature. That's not why he wanted control. He wanted control to ensure long-term or damn near eternal peace. That's what Madara wanted. In his eyes, peaceful cooperation would only be a temporary solution until generations later when emotions are high and problems begin to arise again. So like I said, Madara Uchiha was a realist because, in a way, he was right as far as the imperfect nature of humanity, or in this case, of the shinobi world. They're imperfect beings with emotions. And with emotions, grudges are developed as war and attrition goes on, and family members are deceased, and family members are killed by your enemy. Grudges are built, and animosity continues to grow. And Madara was blatantly aware of that, right? So he was more of a realist than Hashirama, I would say. Now, the moral dilemma is the removal of free will tyrannical or not, right? Is it a righteous act to remove free will, or is it a tyrannical act? Is it a pernicious action, right? You got to ask yourself that. And that's up to the viewer, that's up to you. What do you think is morally righteous? What's more important? Peace and the elimination of violence, or guaranteeing someone's free will despite the possibility of malevolence, despite the possibility of violence and the cycle of war and peace? You got to ask yourself that. That's what makes Madara so polarizing as a figure, as a character, right? That's what makes his actions so intriguing. He wasn't the typical malevolent, pure evil incarnate like Hidan or Kakazu. He was a morally great character with reasonable beliefs, right? His fundamental beliefs were reasonable. He wanted peace. It's not simply, I just want control so I can rule with an iron fist. That's not what he specifically wanted. He wanted the cycle to end. And to him is, if I have to commit some violence to lead to that, and so be it. If I have to step on other people's throats to get there, so be it. And another interesting thing that I extrapolate from Madara Uchiha's character is this. Despite him being all-powerful and being one of the most powerful shinobi in the world, I would argue he lived a life of quiet desperation, and here's why. As time went on, like I said earlier, he became a ticking time bomb. He looked around and said, this cycle is not going to end this way. Even with this new village, with clans cooperating peacefully, the cycle will continue, and this will never end. And that desperation kept building and building and building. And it reached the boiling point when the Uchiha outcasted him and Hashirama said, no, we're not doing things your way. So what happened? He faced Hashirama for the final time. And Hashirama had to put his foot down and be a leader. And seemingly killed him. Obviously he didn't, right? But he had to defeat him thoroughly to get his message across. Because at that point, Hashirama was like, this friendship isn't bigger than the village, isn't bigger than the shinobi world. I must defend it. And that was the true clash of ideology. Similar to Naruto and Sasuke at the end of the war arc, at the end of Shippuden. It's the same thing. There's parallels, many parallels, right? So Madara didn't just want control. He wanted control to ensure peace. But again, that's a moral dilemma, and you got to decide for yourself. Was he a righteous character, or was he not? Let's continue, though.
Heel of Konoha, and those villages in the full awe of the strength of Konoha would never rise against them, and thus a version of peace would be achieved. See, there's really two ways that people boil down leadership: diplomatic and totalitarian. Essentially, with diplomatic leadership, you can talk about things, you can work them out in peaceful unison. However, this leadership is not without its pitfalls. Humans are inherently tricky and selfish. They will 99 times out of 100 act in their own interests.
Exactly.
And so if somebody in a position of power acts in their own interest in a diplomatic environment, it can break the whole thing down. Totalitarianism is essentially ruling with an iron fist. It leaves a significant less amount of choice and freedom, but it also has more security. These systems usually have heavy penalties for anybody who breaks the law, and therefore much less freedom. And while on the outside these systems may look more secure, they're a lot less fun. Essentially, people live in fear, and they don't break the rules because of that fear. But within just the Naruto universe, we've actually seen how this system doesn't work. Look at the Hidden Mist. You see, you could say that the Hidden Mist was cast into a totalitarianism system by Obito. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how they
explain
got
the
there.
difference
What
between
matters is that they were
Madara's
in one. And the
form
Hidden
of
Mist had
government
very
and
loyal
totalitarian
soldiers,
after this.
and
I'll
very
explain the
powerful
difference.
soldiers, and maybe from
There
the
is a
outside,
difference.
it looked like it
After
was
this video.
more stable. But just like with any totalitarianism system, people would run away and defect, or even try to launch coups. In Zabuza and possibly Kisame led a coup against the Mizukage, and almost every single one of the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist left. Well, in the short term, taking choice away from somebody seems like it will add stability. In the long term, it makes people crave freedom. You see, the tricky thing about sentience is that people always want new and different things. We're not a hive mind, we're not worker bees. And while some people can work with a boot heel on the back of their neck, there will always be those who crave more. So unfortunately, a purely diplomatic ruling system won't work because humans aren't perfect, but an iron fist ruling system won't work because humans want freedom. And this is where Hashirama and Madara align. So essentially what I'm telling you is that Hashirama wasn't correct, but neither was Madara. Ironically, the person who was correct in all of this was Tobirama, because the system that works is a system that uses diplomacy when it's important and an iron fist when it's important. Humans are not perfect, but they do deserve faith. And taking choice away from humans only creates larger problems down the line.
It creates resentment.
This is where the problems arise with the
There will always be
influence of the
resentment
human
when freedom
plan.
is removed.
The concept of security or freedom has been talked about in literature for as long as there has been literature. The most important and prevalent book that talks about this topic, and a book that most of you have probably read, is Fahrenheit 451.
It's a great book.
This book tells the story of a future world where all literature that could lead to war or hateful discussions has been destroyed. So the Bible, the Quran, the works of Charles Darwin, anything that could lead people to a polarized view that would put them against each other has been destroyed. So now basically all you have are the works of Dr. Seuss minus the Lorax and every Clifford the Big Red Dog book ever written. And because this information is not out there and now people have no reason to be opposed to each other, society looks like it's perfect. There's no war, people don't hate each other, there's no hate crimes, but there's an underbelly to this entire society. And this underbelly is people who look for that banned literature. And they read this literature and they hold these opinions and they talk about these things. And while some people may fall on other sides and therefore disagree on certain topics, they are informed. And while they live in the bottom dredges of society, running away from an iron fist government trying to kill them and the information they hold, they're happy. Because it's human nature to ask why. And this relates perfectly to Madara's infinite Tsukiyomi plan. See, what Madara is offering is a perfect world. A world with no conflict, no hate, no difference of opinions. Essentially, what he's offering is heaven. But within this heaven, there's no conflict. And to have no conflict in a world, that means there must be no difference of opinions, which means every single person on Earth must have the same exact opinions about everything. And this heaven is unique to every single person brought into it. So let's say there's a dude out there who just loves kicking baby seals. Everybody within his infinite Tsukiyomi dream is gonna be like, hey man, that's a great idea. I didn't like the way they were looking at me. I'm gonna go put my steel toe boots on. But there's a reason that this isn't heaven. And ironically, that reason lies within Madara himself more than anyone. Humans crave conflict. We are warmongering apes, but it's actually a lot simpler than that. Humans desire a problem to fix. And whether that problem be big or small, it is still a problem. And Madara's entire life is conflict. His first conflict was overcoming Hashirama, something he couldn't do. His second conflict was leading Konoha, something he couldn't do. His third conflict was getting the Uchiha to leave Konoha, something he couldn't do. Ironically, his fourth and final conflict was getting the Eye of the Moon plan off, something he couldn't do. Madara wasn't making the infinite Tsukiyomi for the world. He was making it for himself. So let me read you Madara's speech from the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, one of the most iconic speeches of all time.
Listen, in this world, wherever there is light, there is also shadows. And as long as the concept of winners exists, there must also be losers.
Exactly. See, Madara his entire life has been a loser to Hashirama, and he wants to create a universe where he is no longer that. Because at the core fundament of how the Eye of the Moon plan is brought into action is war. A war that didn't exist before. And just like when Madara went to the Hidden Stone Village in order to beat up Mu and Inoki, he was creating conflict that otherwise wouldn't have arose, going directly against what he aligned as his primary core value, which was peace. And this is because Madara reveled in war. He loved it. He just
I don't know if I agree with that. It's a little bit surface level.
What he was trying to accomplish was not the correct thing. Freedom will always be more important than security. If humans never persevered through conflict and weren't allowed to ask questions like why, I wouldn't be recording this right now for you. But let me talk devil's advocate for a second, because obviously I do have a bias and an opinion. So let's talk about the opinion that Madara is correct. Well, there's definitely points in it that I agree with, and actually core tenements of my personality that are aligned with this argument. Essentially, this argument states that everybody is the master of their own universe, the god of their own creation. And this is the part that I agree with. Your brain, this 7-pound lump of gray matter up here, creates quite literally everything you see. Yes, there is a physical world around you, but your brain creates that world around you. Well, not creates the world, but creates how you exist within that world. This bottle is blue to me, but blue to me is based off every blue I've ever seen in reality. The blue I see could actually be yellow to you, even though you also call it blue. My yellow could be your blue. My blue could be your yellow. But because every single blue you've ever seen has been called blue, you look at this and you see blue. Have I lost you yet? Probably. Essentially, perception is reality. However you see something, that is your reality.
Not
necessarily. And whether that thing technically be real or not, if you are perceiving it, it is real to you. When you perceive a dream, it seems real to you until you wake up and you realize that dream was exactly that, a dream. But within the context of the dream, it is just as real as your waking reality. So essentially, being cast into a dream that is essentially what you would define as heaven would be no different from reality. That is to say that because you would be perceiving this dream as it was real, it would be no different to you than being outside of the dream. Because once again, perception is reality. When you dive into the inner nuances of this argument, though, a couple of cracks begin to appear. Essentially, yes, this dream would become reality for you. However, that reality is the manipulation and the creation of somebody else, not your own mind. And therefore, even though it could be perceived as reality and therefore freedom, it would still be a manipulation. But that's only if you draw a line between virtuality and reality. Essentially, this is something that humans have struggled with for a long time. Think of SAO and the way that SAO has a full dive VR experience. Hell, you could even think about VR in the regular world. Hypothetically, everything you perceive in that VR world, be it in the real world or SAO, is technically no less real than anything you experience on Earth, within the confines of this argument. The only thing that's different between this physical world and the VR one that you're experiencing is the line between virtuality and reality. And if we as humans can delete the line between virtuality and reality, we should be able to realize that anything experienced on any plane of existence is real, because we as the masters of our own universe and the creators of everything around us are perceiving it. And therefore, just because it is technically run by electricity and ones and zeros, it is still technically real. And therefore, there's no difference between me taking a sip of this water bottle in real life or in VR. Now, as to whether or not we as humans want to delete the line between virtuality and reality is not something I'm going to get into right now. It's a very long conversation, but that's essentially the core fundament of this argument, that anything perceived, whether it be technically fake or not, is real. So now that I've equipped you with all of the knowledge on both sides of this argument, where do you align? Tell me in the comments below, was Madara correct in his infinite Tsukiyomi plan, or was his manipulation of the greater human will the wrong thing to do? And while you guys are waxing poetic about deep theological issues, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. You know, every once in a while, I just have to make a video where I show you I know big words.
All right, I definitely get my thoughts on this. So let's first touch upon when NCHAMMER said, our perception is our reality. All right, so our tangible reality from millennia of scientific research operates on law and order, right? And I don't just mean our judicial system, our legal system. I mean the way physics work, the way mathematical concepts are executed all around us every day. That operates on law and order. Perception necessarily isn't our reality, and I'm glad he said there is cracks to that statement, because there are. 1 + 1 = 2. Right? Whether you believe that or not, 1 + 1 = 2. The law of motion, the law of gravitation, those aren't based on our perception, right? That is reality despite your beliefs. Right? Now, things that you could argue that depend on our perception would be how we feel towards something that isn't tangible, right? Political topics, right? Morality. I guess technically that depends on our perception. However, there is a universally accepted stance when it comes to morality. Some good pillars are the 10 Testaments in the Judeo-Christian Bible, right? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie. Those are universally accepted throughout the modern world. And I would even argue beyond that in today's day and age, right? So perception being our reality doesn't apply, I would argue, to most things. Definitely not things that are tangible that we interact with in our everyday world, right? If I turn the light switch on, the light is on. And despite having an abnormality where maybe you're blind, the light is still on, right? The light is still on, despite your perception. So also, you got to be specific on what you're talking about here, right? Because some people really believe that they have to see it to believe it, right? They have to see it to believe it. However, I'm under the presupposition that you don't have to, right? I'm under the presupposition that you don't have to. Science, I would argue, is under the presupposition you don't have to see it to believe it. Science is the field where arguably the most exploration is done, right? How electricity was invented. Before that, I'm sure most people couldn't fathom that, but it existed. It just wasn't discovered, right? Fire, when whoever cavemen discovered it, no one could fathom that because they didn't see it. But did it exist? Yes, it did. Many things. So I'm going on a tangent here, but going back to Madara, right? Madara is definitely a morally great character with fundamental beliefs on how to stop the cycle of love and hate, of war and attrition. Madara was a morally great character who had fundamental beliefs on how to stop the cycle of war and peace. His were more radical and extreme compared to Hashirama or Naruto. Why? Because he wanted to remove free will. At first, before his perceived death, he wanted to do it through means of ruling with an iron fist, right? Because he wasn't aware of the infinite Tsukuyomi yet. He wanted to gain as much power as possible, right? Having a self-destructing god complex and take over the shinobi world and use fear to put a halt to all the war and violence that was taking place. So the fear would be the motivation to not engage in violence or malevolence. Later on, when he learned of the infinite Tsukuyomi, probably thanks to Black Zetsu, who was manipulating him, found a way of how to achieve perfect peace, theoretically. Perfect peace. Where there is no chance of malevolence, of violence, of war. Because each individual will be in their perfect heaven. Each individual. However, there is the removal of free will, right? Now that's where the moral dilemma is. You gotta ask yourself, would you rather people have free will and their freedom to live their lives the way they choose? Or would you rather them live in a perfect fairy tale where they get everything they've ever wanted? Now, another problem I have with NC Hammer's argument is that he presupposes that a human would not be able to operate in that perfect world. First of all, we don't know how shinobi are in comparison to humans, right? Obviously, they are imperfect, as evident by the cycle of war and peace. But you can't presuppose that the infinite Tsukuyomi wouldn't work for eternity, right? If it really did go through, if Madara really did succeed. There is no way to prove that. So I get what he's saying when he says humans are just inevitably problem solvers, right? But you can't necessarily presuppose that humans wouldn't be in an optimal position if they were in the infinite Tsukuyomi just because there aren't problems to solve. And again, we're talking about the Naruto verse, not humanity in the real world. So there's that as well. So you can't necessarily definitively claim that. Is it a possibility? Yes. Is it definitive? No. So you can't presuppose that. So this is a very interesting philosophical discussion, to be quite honest. That's how deep it gets. It goes beyond the aesthetics, beyond the power scaling, and even beyond the narrative analysis. It's philosophical, right? You get into the deeper meanings of morality. What is morally righteous? What is the perfect form of government? Would that be a good form of government? Where a prerequisite to enter this fantasy state would be to remove your free will and live in a fantasy heaven land? How many people would go with that, and how many people wouldn't? In my opinion, the people that don't have faith, right? With faith being this intangible sort of substance that seems to fuel people when they want something that cannot be perceived yet, right? Whether it's financial, whether it's physical, whatever. You need faith. Because if you go based on the statistics and the empirical evidence, you most likely won't make it. That's why faith is a necessity. Madara was a realist. He looked at the intangible statistics and probably told himself, no matter what we do, there will always be violence. I'd rather make the chances zero by eliminating free will. That's what his mindset was. And does that make me say that he's automatically malevolent and selfish? No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. It is a valid point of view. And he had valid convictions. He really did. Valid convictions. At the end of the day, his intentions were good. Was he a perfect character? Absolutely not. He was definitely arrogant, had a god complex, and lived a life of quiet desperation, to be quite honest, ironically. Despite him being a powerhouse, he lived a life of quiet desperation. So, this is truly one of the biggest moral dilemmas that really can't be answered. Of course, if you're talking to someone and you guys agree, I guess technically it's answered amongst yourselves. But if you're going to a bigger audience where people have different convictions and different fundamental beliefs, I guarantee you'd be there for a while discussing it. For quite some time. Right, so the founding fathers of the United States, of these modern world countries, had to discuss these things. Right? Obviously, you can't have a hyper-literal scenario where there's an infinite Tsukuyomi. At least that's not possible in current day. Maybe in a few decades, there'll be technology to execute that. But, the founding fathers of the modern countries of the world has had these discussions. What is the best way to operate? And what is morally righteous? We can't be tyrannical, yet we can't remove free will. So currently, in my estimation, the best way to operate is with there being a balance. Will it always be perfectly balanced? Absolutely not. There's always going to be some remover of free will or some removal of security. There's no such thing as perfect balance in an imperfect world. because the infinite Tsukuyomi just isn't possible. We don't have the technology for that, right? And then again, even that's a moral dilemma, because some people don't want their free will removed. They want to have the right to live their lives in the real world, in our tangible reality. At least most people in the modern world. You know, there's always arguments like, oh, maybe this is a simulation. Maybe we are in a simulation right now. Okay. That's a very low probability, but sure. But yeah, guys, this was a very interesting video, and it really opens the conversations up. You know, it really is a good conversation to have with someone that is philosophically insightful. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Was Madara right? Was he wrong? Was he in the middle? Is he morally gray? Is he malevolent to you? Or is he really righteous as a character? Let me know your opinions in the comment section below. I'm always interested to hear. If you have any other recommendations, also let me know in the comment section below. And I'll catch you in the next video, folks. It's Jay the Great signing out. Peace.